understand that our experience shapes our brains, then when we know that, then we can really, we can begin to value our brains. We can begin to value the brilliance of the adaptation to conditions. And that shifts the sort of conversation we have with ourselves and with those that we're working with. So curiosity is really at the heart of a stance around addressing the impact of violence on learning. And it's the impact of all forms of violence, all forms of neglect and absence that affect learning and the capacity to change. So when we want to try and really take advantage of the neuroplasticity of the brain, the ways in which the brain can change, then we have to try to find the ways that will create the environment that makes that possible. So first of all, if we are just curious about how the brain has been shaped, how it's shaped by experience, not only our own or the person we're working with's experience, but their parents, their grandparents. If we can really value that that was the ways in which the brain protected, made life possible in impossible circumstances, then we come at it with a different stance. We come at it with a valuing, a respect, a seeing the strength. And even that shift changes things. It changes how we view it, changes how the person themselves views it, and we get to see it as brilliant strategies. So when we understand that and we value that, then it's a different feeling as we engage with it than when we see it as deficits and problems and disorders and labels in all these ways that seem like there's just something wrong with me. I get to mobilize a different sort of creativity when I understand that, oh, that saved my life. And now, as the conditions change, I want to change how my brain works. So, recognizing that we have this lower part of our brain called the amygdala. That amygdala is the part of the brain that controls our emotions, and it fires to protect us, to keep us alive. And so that is part of, sometimes people call that our primitive brain, because that's the part of the brain that was formed very early on, and it's really well designed to protect us from the sorts of threats that the tiger is about to leap on us, those sorts of threats. And so if the tiger's about to leap on us, we don't want to spend time thinking, oh, what might I do right now? So we don't have blood supply taking us to the upper areas of our brain. It focuses just in this lower area. So immediately there is threat, this area fires. And the more it fires, the more instantly it recognizes that slight tension, that increase of anxiety as life-threatening. So that portion of our brain is ready to fire. And it's that that's preparing us for fight, to fight whatever is threatening us, to flee, to run away from whatever is threatening us, or to freeze. The trouble is, they set off an emergency reaction because at that point, our system is not thinking about our long-term survival. We've got to get over our short-term survival first, so it's not putting any energy into the longer-term things. So it takes away our blood supply from our digestive system. It takes away all those sort of body's resources from the digestive system, from the upper parts of the brain where our complex thinking might slow us down and get in the way of this immediate reaction. That's fabulous, keeps us alive, and if we don't get the release that brings us back down from this emergency, a little one that doesn't get calmed by an adult, a caregiver who helps to soothe them, calm them, bring them back down, if we've had just too much of our lives being up in emergency, it's like we turn the thermostat up and we just stay up in emergency most of the time. So we have to find ways that bring ourselves up from the frozen state and down from the too frenetic, ready to move and fight state. We need to help those we work with find ways and be curious and find the ways to come to that place in that sort of middle band there where there can be some calm, some ability for blood supply to all the parts of the brain. And the more we can get into that place, the more we work towards the integration of the parts of our brain. Our brains have these separate segments, and in trauma, we easily get stuck into the different segments. So we're working first to try and calm that amygdala, that limbic system, so that we can begin to connect up to the higher parts of the brain. So first, the amygdala connects to the right portion of our brain. That's where we know our emotions. That's the more flowing part of our brain. That's the part where we're aware more of energetic connections. That's why it matters so much where each of our brains are at, because when we can create a connection between our emotional sides of our brain, we help to calm it. Amygdala to the right, and then we need to strengthen the connections from the right to the left. And we really are seeing from research that those pathways get stronger the more we use them. We're seeing that mindfulness practices, breathing practices, help to really increase the integration between the parts of the brain and allow us to then use our left, more logical side of our brain to calm the amygdala, to tell it that there is not a tiger right now. It may feel like there is, but there isn't, and it can calm down again. And the more we have the integration between the right side of our brain and the left side of our brain, more we have a rich capacity to engage with whatever life brings us and to engage with the world and to engage with that curiosity that allows us to really learn well. So what are some of the ways we can do it? If we're really curious, we'll see what's working for us and how we might want to do it differently. We can recognize that when we name what's going on, that begins to calm. Naming it tames it. So we're looking for ways to calm that amygdala, to understand that it's not life-threatening right in this moment, and when we name it, that begins to tame it. It begins to help us integrate between the right mode and the left mode, where language is, where the more linear, logical thinking is, and it allows us to be able to calm down a little just in the naming. That's why it's so important that we have this stance rather than using only all of the labels of disorders. When we recognize that the brain has set off this rush of chemicals and glucose to give us energy, then we recognize too that we need to diffuse that energy. And it may be just as simple as going for running or stamping our feet. It can be drumming. It can be tied to things around music. Anything that helps to sort of really use some of that energy can make it possible to come to calm. It's not enough just to say, oh, we need to calm ourselves. We have to use up those chemicals and energy that's coursing through our bodies. We can learn to ground ourselves or help others to learn to ground so that they are, or we are, in this present moment, not caught up in all of the past. Simple little things like just rubbing one hand with the other or rubbing our thighs, those sorts of things help us to be in this moment, in this place, rather than in all of our reactions that come out of all of the past stuff. So we can reshape our brains. If we don't like the behavior, we need to change the conditions, because the behavior is that self-protective response to the conditions. And so it would be so important in the shelter to have stuff with mindfulness, with movement, the gentle movement, with strong, fierce movements that use up the energy, with creative, holistic approaches, because they allow us to access some of our knowing and our wisdom without having to get across to the left brain and the logical part. If we know that those pathways are not so well developed in the aftermath of violence and trauma and neglect, then we know we want to do the things that help to develop the integration, and all of those sorts of activities increase the integration, strengthen those pathways, and we reshape, we resculpt the brain. Whatever our role is, we can find in any moment the moments where we can support mothers and their children to re-see, to value their own brain's brilliant response, to find the ways to understand why it's behaving the way it is, and to find new ways that work for them to build those new pathways, which are built through the conditions of safety that are fully experienced as safe, and through the conditions of connection.